Hello and welcome to another edition of Canada Files. I'm Jim Deeks, and I'm particularly delighted to say that our guest this week is a three-time Olympic medalist in the grueling sport of rowing and a true Canadian hero, Silken Laumann, who joins us from her vacation home in Whistler, British Columbia. Before retiring in 1999, Silken won a silver and 2 bronze medals in 3 Olympic Games, but she will forever be remembered by Canadians for winning bronze in 1992 in Barcelona, only weeks after suffering what doctors said was a tragic, career-ending injury. However, as we'll discuss, that wasn't the only hardship that Silken has faced in her incredible life journey. Silken Laumann, thanks so much for joining us on Canada Files.
I'm happy to be here, Jim.
Well, before we start talking about you, I want to ask about the state of Canadian rowing. As you would well know, 25 or 30 years ago, Canada was considered, if not the #1 country in rowing, it was certainly among the top 2 or 3. But that seems to have changed a little bit, even though the Canadian women's eights did win gold in Tokyo in 2020. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Canadian dominance is not what it was a generation ago. Would you agree with that?
Well, the women's gold medal in Tokyo was a spectacular performance. And the good news is a lot of those women are young, so they are going to be the next generation of incredible athletes that our country has. There's a lot of things that have to go right in order to be as dominant as we were in, say, the 1992 Olympics. You have to have the best coaches pretty well in the world working, and there has to be, I think, some stability in the organization. So sport in Canada really is notoriously unstable in its organization, and you know, coaching has become more professional. So good coaches are looking for that sort of longevity working in a country. And I just don't think we are able to provide that right now as things are in our sport. Saying that, we've got some really bright lights in our organization. We do have some good coaches. So I think if the system itself can stabilize, we could be I don't know if as dominant, because I think the riches are spread amongst many different nations now. You don't see as often one country dominating as you did perhaps in the 80s and the early 90s.
Would you care to make a prediction about the rowing results for Canada coming into Paris this summer?
You know, I think coming into Paris, we could certainly win 2, maybe even 3 medals, and one of them, again, could be gold.
That's certainly reassuring. So let's now talk about you. What got a young pre-teenage girl from Mississauga, Ontario, just west of Toronto, interested in rowing back in the mid-70s in the first place? I mean, it wasn't exactly a cool sport for girls to get into.
That's true. In fact, my first love was track and field, which was a lot more glamorous than rowing. I was a decent runner, but kept getting injured. My sister, however, had signed up for the rowing team. And I think she thought it was going to be like canoeing in Algonquin Park in Northern Ontario. However, she was very good at it right from the get-go. And her coach would ask me periodically, when was I going to try this great sport? I tried it the summer I was injured with stress fractures from running, and honestly, Jim, I just fell in love with it. The water, the outdoors, the combination of like brute strength and technical know-how, the beautiful feeling of the boat moving underneath me. I just loved it and got pretty good at it quickly.
Well, I know that there was another maybe darker reason why you got deeply into rowing as a teenager, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But on the water, you and your older sister Danielle formed a team, and as double sculls, you actually, perhaps unexpectedly, won bronze at the Los Angeles Games in 1984. Did you even at that time think that you had, perhaps just individually, that you had the makings to be an Olympic champion?
Well, I think I literally dreamed about it from the moment I picked up an oar. Doing that well in the '84 Olympics certainly opened up the possibility of doing well individually. I loved rowing the single right from the get-go, that sort of pressure in a way, but also that all of the responsibility, good and bad, was on myself, appealed to me.
Well, as you say, you started to specialize in single scull. You had competed with your sister in the doubles. You also were on a quad team, but single scull was always your preference, or was that something that was imposed on you by your coaches?
I think two things, Jim. One was I had a curve in my spine, and that meant that I was always more comfortable in a single because I could kind of adjust the boat to my body. I loved that personal responsibility that is involved with being a single athlete in any sport. It comes down to your performance. You get all the glory, but also all those sad moments when you don't do well alone. And I think it just appealed to my personality.
Well, you had some sad moments along the way, but going into Barcelona, the Olympics in 1992, did you by then expect to win gold in the single sculls? You had just come off winning gold in the '91 World Championships. Did you expect to win gold, and did you feel that all eyes were on you at that point?
Well, certainly going into the '92 Olympics, I was not only the world champion, but I was the World Cup champion. I dominated the year before. So my own personal expectations, and probably that of my competitors in the rowing world, was that I was going to, win a gold medal. And I think anything short of that would have been disappointing. But then, of course, circumstances changed.
Well, let's talk about those, because every Canadian will remember this. About 10 weeks before the single sculls finals in Barcelona, you were on a training run and an accident occurred. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, it was 10 weeks before the Olympics. I was in Germany competing in a World Cup race. It was actually going to be the last time that I was going to compete before the '92 Olympics. And in the warm-up area where there wasn't sufficient safety measures, I was struck by the men's pair, the German men's pair, and my boat shattered on the side and drove 200 pieces of wood into my lower right leg. Literally shredded the muscle. It shattered the bone. It did tendon and ligament and nerve damage. And like in sort of just a split second, I knew my entire life had changed.
So against all odds, you still managed to, well, not quite overcome that devastating injury, but you actually ended up competing in that race with a bandage on your leg, no less.
Yeah.
And with a mighty final kick, you managed to come in third and win the bronze in that race. And no, it wasn't the gold that you might have been expecting, but it is probably one of the great performances by any single athlete in Olympic history, certainly in rowing history. Looking back, are you astounded at what you were able to pull off by getting back in and by finishing third?
Absolutely. I actually spent 3 weeks in the hospital, and then 7 weeks later, won an Olympic medal. And the extent, it wasn't just a broken bone, it was massive skin damage. It was a shattered ankle. It was that nerve damage. I had a lot of skin damage. So when I look at it now, I see it really as an example of mind over matter. How when the desire is so great and we're so focused, and I think one of my strengths as a human has always been this kind of hyper focus, my ability to really, really lock into what I want to achieve and just go for it. That was just that kind of mindset and that positivity and that inability to let go of that possibility of going and winning a medal was really what got me through, because it doesn't actually make kind of logical sense when I look at the extent of the injury, something that I still live with today.
So I know that you've talked about this tragic accident now for almost exactly 30 years. But is it still painful and emotional for you to have to rekindle that memory and that painful, literally painful memory?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, when I remember something, I am the kind of person that goes right into that moment. And so in some ways, I'm feeling the feelings that I felt 30 years ago. On the other hand, you know, the accident, as horrific as it was and has left so much lifelong physical damage in my leg, you know, it opened up a lot of possibilities in my life. You know, I became very well known in Canada. I became sort of a story of inspiration and hope, which I've been able to kind of build out and in my life today provide inspiration, hope to other people in all sorts of different areas. So as so many things in life, it's also as tragic and difficult as it was in the moment, it's also been a blessing in other ways.
So why didn't you quit at that point, after those Olympics? Surely you had demonstrated to Canadians, to yourself, and to the world that you were truly an Olympic champion, even if you hadn't won the gold. You could have easily walked away at that point.
I think having been the world champion, having won the World Cup, I mean, I was in this kind of upswing in my career. And it was an exciting time to realize that, you know, I could consistently become a medalist in the single sculls. So I think I wasn't ready. You know, I had some unfinished business, you know, an Olympics where I wasn't injured. But also I wanted to enjoy winning some more world championships. It was pretty fun when you can be that in that kind of shape and in that kind of competitive, you know, being able to be one of the top 3 in the world consistently year after year. So I got to do that between 92 and 96.
Well, for those who have forgotten, you did continue on, and you came back and competed in the Los Angeles Games in 96, sorry, Atlanta in 96, where you won silver. So that may have been, in view of the circumstances 4 years before, that may have been as impressive a win as your bronze medal in 92. You finally did, though, retire in 1999, and I guess most people would have thought, well, Silken will go off and have a nice life now with wonderful memories, maybe not all of them wonderful, behind her. But away from the water, life hasn't been as easy as some people might have thought it would be. Tell us a bit about some of the challenges that you've faced since you retired 23 years ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the nature of being a human being is that we have challenges, and I had challenges while I was rowing, the accident being the most obvious one, and I had a lot of challenges growing up. You know, I grew up in a house with a mom who had an undiagnosed mental illness at a time where nobody talked about mental illness, and mental illness was largely not treated. And so for me, I think a lot of my motivation in becoming an athlete and a lot of the drive, that internal drive that I had, really revolved around wanting to prove myself to myself, wanting to have some worth, which is something that I really struggled with as a young person. So, you know, it's interesting how in life, like, there's always a flip side to every challenge that we had. You know, and then of course, because I'm human, like all of us, I continued to have challenges. I went through a divorce when my children were really little. They were only 2 and 4. And that was heartbreaking for all involved. But it also led to, you know, new chapters of our lives. The man that I'm now married to, which has just been a magical and sort of spiritual connection between us. So, you know, all of these things just continue to deepen me as a human being, and to continue to give me almost more connection points with my audiences, certainly when I'm speaking and when I'm writing.
Well, you covered a lot of that territory in your 2014 autobiography, which was titled Unsinkable, the untold story. What was the untold story up to that point? Was it the relationship with your mother and your mother's struggles, or the anxiety and depression you'd gone through, which I guess were almost one and the same?
Yeah, they're kind of related, aren't they? You know, I think that we all have these somewhat two-dimensional ideas of our heroes, of people we watch on TV. And from the 1992 Olympics, people saw me as that woman who overcame the accident, you know, who had this incredible attitude and drive, and was always positive and uplifting to other people. And you know, the truth of it is, yeah, that is who I am. But so is what I've overcome. And you know, as you said earlier, some of the darkness in my life. And so I think that untold story really was that childhood story of growing up in a home with a mom who was struggling so deeply. And you know, even 7 years ago when I published the book, we weren't talking that openly about mental health. We were certainly not in the place that we are today, where not only are we talking about it, we're looking to support one another in our health journeys, and we're even recognizing that, like, everybody's got mental health. Everybody needs to invest in their mental health. So the conversation has shifted so much. But I can tell you, when I published my autobiography in 2014, it was terrifying. It was terrifying to come forward and be so open and vulnerable about my life. But I had this absolute knowing that this book was going to help a lot of people by being as vulnerable and as open as I chose to be.
Did it help you? Did it help to bury those childhood demons that you'd had?
Yeah, although it would have helped me if I'd published it or not, right? So, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I think sometimes when I write, I'm a lifelong writer, a lifelong journaler. There is this thing about working out and letting go, and then to find the courage to actually put it out there publicly, and then to go through all the interviews and all of that. In a way, yeah, that was all very part of that healing process and that part of that letting go process.
Since your retirement, you've done a lot of motivational speaking, as have a lot of former athletes. You all come from a perspective of focus and dedication, but each one of you has a slightly different message. What is your primary message to your audiences?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I want people to find their own, you know, their own greatness, their own, first of all, their own goals and dreams, to have the courage to be themselves, to be vulnerable, to believe that anything's possible. I mean, when I go back to my life and being a little girl and sometimes feeling like I had no voice, no power, you know, when I was 11, I set 3 dreams for myself. I wanted to write a book. I wanted to help children in Africa, and I wanted to go to the Olympics and win a medal. And I've done all of those things in my life, and I continue to do things that I imagine in my head. So, you know, really recognizing the power of our imagination to kind of create the path of our life. Like, our minds are just unbelievably powerful, and I see it more and more, you know, as I've grown and matured. I'm married to a man who believes anything's possible, and you know, he doesn't seem to spend very much time in self-doubt, and what he's able to do in the business world. He owns over 500 fitness clubs, you know, and he just doesn't have that same doubt. He just believes it's possible. So I've been very blessed to be able to see in my own life and some of the people that, you know, that I've come to know, that power. And I really want other people to see it in themselves, because, you know, we are always getting in our own way. I mean, we're all the same from that perspective, is that it's our doubt and our fear and our history that we bring forward, and it kind of prevents us from doing a lot of the things that would ultimately make us happy.
You've also spent a fair amount of time involved in the advocacy of mental illness, not promoting mental illness, but promoting understanding of mental illness. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in that sector.
Well, I think writing my story, I really began to understand the power of actually, like you said, sharing that story. Was it therapeutic? Yes, it was, right? but also how a lot of the answers to good mental health actually come from sharing with one another. That is part of it, being part of community, being able to tell our story, even if it's just to ourselves. So I created a platform called Unsinkable and Unsinkable Youth, and it's a platform where people can share their stories, actually not just about mental health, but about what they've overcome, what have been the challenges in their life, and how they overcame. And the filter that we use in our organization is, is it hopeful and helpful to others? So even the most difficult story of losing a child or being in a depression so deep that you're hospitalized, it comes from a place of, this is what I did, and this is what worked for me, and this is what's helped. And I know that those stories help other people that are struggling. And from there, we live in this incredible world where media and digital and social media, so we've become a connection point for so many people. And we also have programs for young people to connect with one another and to work on better mental and physical health.
Let's go back a bit to your career. What, from the perspective of 2022, was your greatest achievement as a rower?
Wow. There are some pretty special moments. Definitely winning the World Championships, because it was something that I had dreamt about for so many years. And then, the way that the race unfolded, it was such a close race the entire time. But for the last 30 strokes, I pulled ahead, and I knew I was going to win. So I literally had 30 strokes to sort of capture the excitement of being the best in the world. And that was pretty special and really, stands out as a star moment. Of course, my medal in 92 and 96 were also special.
Well, I asked you about your greatest achievement, but as someone who's been elected to 2 Canadian Sports Halls of Fame, one in Ontario and the National Hall of Fame, and many, many other medals and honors along the way, what would you say is your proudest moment in your career, on or off the water?
I think that the Canadian Walk of Fame, being inducted into the Walk of Fame, really was a sparkly moment for me. It was something that I didn't expect. A lot of movie stars, a lot of famous people get inducted, and I never really thought of myself so much in that company. Of course, none of us do, right? We all think of ourselves, especially in Canada, we're just Canadian. But that was special, to be in the company of these great musicians and artists, and to be recognized not only in my sport, not only in the sport world, but in the world of excellence. And my dad was there, my best friends were there. It was a pretty special night.
One of the other names on the Canadian Walk of Fame is Mary Pickford, who was probably the biggest movie star during the silent era, and she was known as Canada's sweetheart. I don't think that label was ever pinned on you, but for a number of years back in the 80s and 90s, I think you would have qualified as Canada's sweetheart then. Did you like the fame, not notoriety, but just being such a celebrity, or did that make you uncomfortable at the time?
I think with people, I'm very extroverted. I need a lot of alone time in order to recharge. I need a lot of creative time by myself. And sometimes when you become such a public person, it's very difficult to find that time. It's difficult to put those boundaries up. And so I really struggled with that for a few years. People thinking it's rude, or being worried that it was rude to pull away after an hour of being in public. But I've since really understood that to be part of kind of what my needs are as a human being, and I'm just like super in tune with what I need. I think fame's a double-edged sword. It's wonderful to be recognized for doing something well. I think we all like that. And certainly it's easier to get into restaurants and things like that. That was kind of fun. But the lack of privacy, the giving up of privacy, is a pretty high cost for most people. And certainly I found that. I also say that, Canadians are very gracious and they're very polite. And, especially when I was with my kids, people were very respectful and are very respectful to this day.
Last question, the one I ask all my guests on Canada Files, but it's amazing the variety of answers that I get. And the question is, what does being Canadian mean to you?
Well, I think first about the land, how sacred, ancient, magical our land is. We're so fortunate, and being Canadian is tied with the land for me, and the water, I guess. And secondly, I think of the word freedom. I've been very fortunate as a woman particularly to explore a sport, to explore my potential in so many different avenues. And I've been given the freedom to do that, and I never take that for granted. And we have to, as a country and as a people, continue to value and to fight for that.
Silken Laumann, thanks so much for your thoughts and your insight, and continued best wishes to you going forward. Thanks for joining us on Canada Files.
Thank you, Jim.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time with more Canada Files.
The preceding program was made possible through the generous support of Philip B. Lind, as well as the following donors: Akito Investments, Inc., the Browning Watt Foundation, Mary Davey, John and Margaret Deeks, Wendy Deeks, Michael and Mary Ellen Hogan, Ted and Alice Kernahan, David and Cheryl Carr, the Bruce H. Mitchell Foundation, the North Pine Foundation, Francis and Eleanor Shen, the 63 Foundation, and by the Central Canadian Public Television Association.